So, can you give me a summary of the overall picture of the 5 countries that are in a crisis at the moment in Africa, and could you tell us how serious the situation is in these countries?
I suppose at Oxfam we're working in many different contexts around the world, and hunger is an increasingly important issue because there's been an alarming number of developments over the past period, which has now seen that famine has been declared in South Sudan. In northeastern Nigeria is already likely to be experiencing famine, while South Sudan and Yemen are on the brink. So across just those 4 countries, there's about 30 million people who are experiencing severe levels of what we'd call food insecurity, that is, difficulty being able to access food, and malnutrition. So when you think about it, that's like 6 times the population of the island of Ireland who are experiencing really difficult times in terms of not having enough to eat. And we've all seen from the lessons of the past decades and even back, further than that over the centuries, how devastating these crises can be for people. And I suppose as well, if these crises are left unresolved, if there isn't more action taken now, there'll be a catastrophic rise in malnutrition and deaths.
And the 4 countries, Yemen, there's famine in South Sudan at the moment, and northeast Ethiopia. Could you just name them again?
So famine has been declared in South Sudan, and then northeastern Nigeria is already likely to be experiencing famine, while Somalia and Yemen are on the brink. So to give you some numbers on that. So in South Sudan, famine has been declared, and there's 4.9 million people there who are classified as being dangerously hungry. In Yemen, there's 17 million people who are dangerously hungry. And in another country which is said to be on the brink of famine, that's Somalia, nearly 3 million people are dangerously hungry. And it is likely that people in northeastern Nigeria are experiencing famine. The figures are that 4.7 million people are dangerously hungry in the northeast of that country, with about 44,000 people said to be in famine-like conditions. So the massive scale, when you think about all those people and the real worry is, how will those figures change over time? Because the longer and more protracted a food crisis becomes, you can see very sudden increases in terms of people, more and more people becoming hungry as their resources are further depleted, and also the fear that people will die as a result.
I spoke to you about Yemen and West Africa a few months ago, and I also spoke to Maeve MacDonald from Concern Worldwide about South Sudan 2 or 3 months ago. How much money is needed to overcome the crises in these countries this year? And even if we solve the hunger crisis in the crises in these countries this year, can you tell us what is needed to solve the problem of hunger and famine in Africa, so that these 5 countries and others are not facing famine next year or some other time later in the future?
Well, the UN a while back issued an urgent appeal for $4.4 billion to meet the needs of people experiencing hunger in Nigeria, Somalia, South Sudan and Yemen. And they've been struggling over the past while to meet that figure. So there's, I suppose, a lot of expectation and hope that different international members of the international community will be able to provide some of that funding. And I suppose your question was about how do we prevent similar situations or from these situations getting worse. And I suppose the thing to remember about a hunger crisis is that the context is different in different countries. So, for example, in South Sudan and in Yemen, there's conflict going on, which is exasperating the situation and making it difficult for people to get food, because it's hard to get food around or to transport food in those scenarios. Talking about Somalia, there's been persistent drought there, linked, which has been exacerbated by climate change. That's a really big factor as well in terms of the hunger situation there. So I suppose what's required is an approach that not only helps to resolve the challenges that people are facing today, but it really underlines the importance of preparing people for crises in the future and that means actively tackling issues like climate change, helping communities to become more resistant to the impact of that. It also requires, in terms of situations that are exacerbated by conflict, that more is done to help try and broker peace in those regions, because those are, I guess, factors that are really helping to worsen the situation.
Was it a great relief to you recently when the US Congress voted in favour of nearly $1 billion in humanitarian aid this year? That's on top of the overseas development aid expenditure in general. Was that a big relief?
I suppose we welcome, the commitment of every government to provide funding and assistance to the most vulnerable people in the world. So absolutely any, declaration by governments in terms of helping people is to be welcomed. But I suppose it requires as well that, the international community broadly takes responsibility for what's happening and providing not only funding but also that kind of the work that's needed in terms of trying to come to peace in places which are affected by conflict, and also really taking seriously the issue of climate change and the very visible impact we see that it's having in communities, particularly in some of these countries that I've been referring to.
Sorcha, how can our listeners keep up to date on the crises in these countries, and how can our listeners help?
I suppose there's a lot of great sources of information, like online, in terms of Google News. If you use that will help bring up different information from different sources about what's going on in terms of these different scenarios. On our website, Oxfam Ireland, we have a regular blog, and we're really trying to help shine a light on what's happening in the countries where we're working, because we work in South Sudan, in northeast Nigeria, in Yemen, in Somalia, and we're doing everything we can to try and help people in terms of providing water and sanitation, emergency food support, cash for people so they can buy food, health and hygiene work as well. So to help support this work, Oxfam Ireland welcomes any donations that people may want to give on our website, oxfamireland.org, or you can make a donation to this hunger crisis appeal in any of our shops.
Sorcha, an féideart achar a thabhairt dún faoin na cúig tír atá an mhaol, agus insean dún faoi céicó Trump cúiseach is a bhfuil cuasaí san dtíortha seo?
Well, tá muid na gobar tíortha fud an domhan ach go chóirtha tá mid ag ddíriú ar cúpla tír ach go chóirtha ó híomh fáib an ocrais, agus siad sin an Sudan Haas, Iarthuaisceart Nigeria, Somalia agus Yemen, agus sa tíortha sin mar shampla tá annach chuid fáib an ó híomh ocrais, agus deirtear go bhfuil Iarthuaisceart Nigeria a bhuail gohfuil daoine sin atá gurta orthú 44 míle duine deirtear, tá le tamil le cúpla míonús gurta fógraí sa Sudan Haas, agus deirtear go bhfuil daoine i Somalia agus i Yemen mhuail gurta amachchan seo, agus nar chuireann tú na figurí le chéile tá thart ar 3 milliún daoine sa cheirtíir seo, agus iad ag folann stór aspa bí agus freisin tá daoine bortha faoi malnutrition freisin.
Tá sí dochreidte céicó ulmhór is na bhfuil na fáibanna ceithre tíortha seo nach bhfuil?
Tá agus nar smíonn tú faoi sin 3 milliún duine sin sé iad daonra Oileán na hÉireann, agus sogat an cóhaics agsúil i tíortha san tíortha sin ó híomh na cúisne ina bhfuil ulfáib ocrais i gceist. Mar shampla tá cuimhlint i cúisne sa tíortha sin tar éis daoine chur amachchas na háit na cónaí tá acu as na pobal an a rééis siad de bhór tríd níl daoine an slíomhethe tá acu a chmadadul ar siúil, agus maiallar sin ní bhíonn siad an teacht ar bia, teacht ar na garí, teacht ar postna agus teacht ar margaí ina féidir leat bia cheannacht agus de bhór ar an éfacht seo mínig sais tríd agus cuilann sé ar tródáil agus ar talmhaíocht cén sé sin nach daoine ag fás an bí atá ag tastal agus supan sé sin margaí bí ag obair geart agus mar sin agus aráig agus freisin gás Somália tá trimach olc an sin agus tá athú aráide chur leis an trimach sin agus sa sin cis eile na bhfuil daoine Somália mar hampla ag follint.
Leabhar mé leat faoi Yemen agus ar na Africa roinnt mian ó hin agus leabhar mé le Maeve McDonald ó Concern Worldwide faoin túdán hascúpla mí ó hin freisin. Céimhéid billiún atá digi chun fáibanna na ggéirchéime seo a thú a sorga?
Dúirt na náisiúnaithe tamlín ó hin go raibh $4.4 billion digi chun dul an lech leis an fáib ocrais in Nigeria, Somalia an Sudan has agus Yemen agus tá sé Jackar dómh teacht ar an airgid sin agus tá an dulgus inis ar an pobal idir náisiúnta taú leis na hiireachtaí agsúla tá ar siúil chun ceirú le daoine is bucht ar dain cosna seo agus daoine atá i gás Tharbh don seirich.
Tá is a gom gur bhótáil palatóirí san Stát Aontaithe ar son muoinú beagnach $1 billion le déine ó héh faoiseamh déanú. Cad atá sibh ag glór ón na tíortha is sebhra ar domhan agus an féidir a rá cad is féidir lenar néisiúirí sa bhaile a dhéanamh?
Well, chuirmid fáilte rih aoníocht a dhéanaan aon rialtas muoinú chur fáil de haid obair éigandóla agus obair forbartha agus stocha tá sé ríthobhachtach go mbeadh na tíortha sebhar dain ag déanamh garthad gur féidir le chun muoinú agus cúnamh agus takeíocht de thuirt dus na daoine atá ag follint san tíortha agsúla seo. Chamála sin is stocha tá sé tábhachtach go marnimidir na príomhcúisina muineann leis an ocras lear mé faoi cuiblint níos luithe agus léiríonn sé seo an tábhacht atá an ó híomh teachtar siocháin agus réiteach i gcuiblint mar tá sé solar go bhfuil cuiblint a chur le fáib an ocras go riint tíortha agus freisin caiimiid dul an lech le fáib athú aráide is léir go bhfuil sé ag churras do daoine is fear rud é agus muna néintear níos smú go hidir náisiúnta chun ceir le daoine dul an lech leis an athú aráide agus an slí beatha acu a athú anas nach méid siad lág agus athú aráide gar níos measa sin an tábhachtach freisin.